Produced by the Douglas Aircraft Company, who gave the US and the Allies the legendary Douglas SBD, nicknamed Slow But Deadly, and the rugged A-20 Havoc, the Stiletto was a unique piece of engineering. It was the sleekest of the early experimental aircrafts of supersonic speeds. The goal of the aircraft was ambitious. It was to take off from the ground under its own power, climb to high altitude, maintain a sustained cruise speed of Mach 2, then land under its own power. The aircraft was also to test the feasibility of low aspect ratio wings and the large-scale use of titanium in aircraft structures. Nonetheless, although the long and slim fuselage had the looks to accomplish its goals, the X-3 Stiletto fell short of its performance goals. It proved underpowered to the grand idea of reaching Mach 2, as it could barely get to Mach 1. Its testing, though, gave engineers the insights needed to produce the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. This plane had a similar trapezoidal wing and could successfully reach Mach 2 speeds easily. Today, the Douglas X-3 Stiletto is remembered for its slender look and its ambitious capabilities that distance its design from other iconic Douglas aircraft that were bulky, rugged, and built for intense combat situations. During the 1940s, the jet engine continued to grow as a viable propulsion system for military aircraft. The alternative was rocket power, but these systems were too fuel-hungry and for limited tactical scope concerning fighters or interceptors. The turbojet suffered from some of the same limitations, and this in turn would limit the range and mostly performance of many designs of the post-war period. Consideration was given to hybrid-powered aircraft which retained use of a propeller-turning engine coupled with a rocket or turbojet engine for an increased boost. However, these did not reveal any dramatic performance benefits against the best piston-powered propeller-driven fighters of World War II and thereafter. By the late 1940s, jets continued their evolution to the point that the next major conflict would give rise to the next jet versus jet duels in the skies over the Korean peninsula. From the Korean War came the North American F-86 Sabre and Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-15 fighters, as well as other well-known types. Despite their sleek designs and jet propulsion systems, these aircraft were only able to reach Mach 1 speeds in a dive. What was sought were aircraft who could perform faster in a sustained way and go beyond the Mach 1 ceiling to stay there. In 1941, supersonic flight was still a point of conjecture, a theory yet to be proven. Just how fast could an aircraft go? Is there a limit? In the years leading up to World War II, the US Army requested that Douglas Aircraft Company study the possibilities of creating aircraft designs capable of supersonic speed. The US was about to enter the war. American isolationists had put enough pressure on Roosevelt's government to refrain from joining the global conflict. Nonetheless, the embargo on Japan's expansionist empire was a disguised declaration of war that would detonate sooner than expected. With that in mind, and ever since these Japanese began their aggressive expansion in the mid-1930s, the US made efforts to modernize and grow its military across all branches. The Army, the Navy, the Marines, and the Air Corps began replacing their old equipment and fortifying US territories in Asia if the Japanese decided to attack. No one expected any real threat, but they were wrong. When the Army requested that Douglas design an aircraft capable of reaching Mach 1 speeds or supersonic flights that could break the sound barrier, the company was busy producing the legendary Douglas SBD, or Slow But Deadly. This aircraft would become crucial during the first year of the war, especially in the Pacific, when the US was caught by surprise at Pearl Harbor. From 1941 until the beginning of 1943, the Douglas SBD would be the vanguard of the US Air Corps, fighting off the Japanese Zeros in Midway, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and the Solomon Islands campaign. Ongoing modifications made to the company's most effective aircraft, the SBD and the A-20 Havoc, kept engineers away from focusing on experimental aircraft such as the supersonic fighters. The war effort and the fate of the world came first. Sturdy and steady remained the name of the game. The company had to fulfill aircraft requests shipping overseas to the UK, France, and especially Russia. Stalin was desperate to rebuild his air forces after the furious German advance of Operation Barbarossa. In December 1943, when the tide of the war began to slowly favor the Allied nations, the US Air Force again requested aircraft companies to come up with a Mach 1 aircraft. US engineers knew that supersonic fighters and jets were the future of aerial combat. Some designs were successful, but with technology advancing quickly with every new discovery, the US Air Force wanted to take it to the next level. With the sole purpose of getting ahead of the Soviet Union in the arms race, the rising enemy of the decades-long Cold War, the US government was focused on developing cutting-edge military-grade technology before the Soviets did. The US Army and USAF requested aircraft companies to develop a design capable of reaching or surpassing Mach 2 and maintaining such a speed. The result was the ambitious Douglas X-3 Stiletto. In January, Douglas submitted a project for approval, but the program never saw the light. It would not be until June 1945 that the Secretary of War, Henry L. Stimson, approved Douglas's request to develop an aircraft capable of Mach 2 at more than 29,000 feet. The war had come to an end in Europe. New intel gathered from the German engineers gave the US valuable information for further technological advances. The design of the Douglas X-3 Stiletto is the subject of US design patent number 172588, granted on July 13, 1954 to Frank N. Fleming and Harold T. Luskin, and assigned to the Douglas Aircraft Company Incorporation. Fleming led the early effort of putting together the preliminary detailed specifications that now included sustained Mach 2 flight at 30,000 feet for a period of 30 minutes, as set forth by the AAF contract. Douglas began working on an airframe powered by combinations of rockets and jet engines that could produce enough thrust to reach Mach 2. Now known as the Model 499, the research airplane ran into a snag in 1946, when the ARMV's Materiel Command, or AMC, raised concern over the thrust estimates for the turbojet's afterburner. The AMC felt that the estimates were too optimistic, so Fleming and his staff laid out possible twin-jet configurations to address this concern. In 1947, plans changed when the Westinghouse Company announced it was conducting tests on a unique afterburner-equipped turbojet called J-46. This allowed the Douglas engineers to drop the use of rocket boosters and focus solely on building their new plane around the J-46 jets. When the airframe design was concluded, Douglas and the USAF signed an agreement on June 30, 1949. This funding provided two Model 499D aircraft, which received the new designation of X-3. Douglas Aircraft was building aircraft with names like Sky Raider, Sky Knight, Sky Ray, and Sky Warrior. This was in keeping with the Sky series of aircraft names the company had adopted. These aircraft spanned the gamut. From a single-engine fighter to a medium-sized jet bomber, the X-3, on the other hand, defied description. The X-3 was to be a breakthrough aircraft, respecting a quantum leap in aeronautical technology, and this may be the reason for the departure from their manufacturer's sky names. The aircraft was named Stiletto. Never had an aircraft design been so visually striking. The Stiletto was stunning from every angle. The airplane exuded speed. It was quite obvious that speed was the intent of the design. The X-3's configuration consisted of a long, narrow fuselage with a high fineness ratio, and two engine inlets high on the center body, beginning just aft of the highly blended cockpit windshield. An empennage assembly was located at the end of an elegant tail boom, poised above the engine exhaust ducts. The fuselage was constructed mainly of aluminium and was designed with 3 breakpoints to facilitate maintenance. During the first months, the team at Douglas encountered one problem that would ultimately doom the project. Unfortunately, teething problems with the Westinghouse J-46 power plant surfaced in mid-1948, delaying the X-3 and raising concern with the Air Force. The decision was made to temporarily forego the J-46 and use the service-tested J-34 equipped with afterburner in an attempt to keep the program on track. The underpowered J-34 engine would be used to get both X-3 aircraft up and flying while Westinghouse debugged their J-46. When available, the J-46s would then be installed. The J-46 would have raised the performance of the J-34 from 49,000 pounds thrust on afterburner to 7,000, which would have drastically increased overall power. The team had to make adjustments to the X-3 to fit the J-34 engines and make the most out of it when it came to performance. In 1950, the National Air Advisory Committee for Aeronautics made a series of recommendations to Douglas for improving the aircraft design, which had some flaws that would lead to uncontrolled oscillations. The first aircraft was built and delivered to Edwards Air Force Base, California, on the 11th of September 1952. The X-3 featured an unusually slender, streamlined shape, having a very long, gently tapered nose and small trapezoidal wings. At the same time, the small straight wings were designed for optimal speed at Mach 2. The aim was to create the thinnest and most slender shape possible in order to achieve low drag at supersonic speeds. It was 66 feet 9 inches long, with a wingspan of 22 feet and 8¼ inches, and a height of 12 feet. Weighing 16,120 pounds, the emphasis of the X-3 was on its speed. The extended nose was to allow for the provision of test equipment, while the semi-buried cockpit and window screen were designed to alleviate the effects of thermal thicket conditions. The low aspect ratio, unswept wings were designed for high speed, and later, the Lockheed design team used that data from the X-3 tests for the similar F-104 Starfighter wing design. Due to both engine and airframe problems, the partially completed second aircraft was cancelled, and its components were used for spare parts. The first X-3 Hop was made on the 15th of October 1952 by Douglas test pilot Bill Bridgman. During a high-speed taxi test, Bridgman lifted the X-3 off the ground and it flew about 1 mile or 1.6 kilometers before settling back onto the lakebed. The official first flight was made by Bridgman on the 20th of October and lasted about 20 minutes. The performance of the X-3 was mediocre at best. The X-3 had a clunky takeoff speed of 260 miles an hour. During 20 minutes of testing, Bridgman radioed Major Charles E. Yeager and reportedly told him this thing doesn't want to stay in the air. When the demonstration exercise was done, Bridgman touched down at 240 miles an hour to keep the plane stable. He made a total of 26 flights, counting the hop, by the end of the Douglas tests in December 1953. Things did not change much in terms of achieving better results. Despite design tweaks, the J-34 engines were always going to be underpowered, even with the addition of afterburners from the solar aircraft. The X-3 reported a maximum speed of 706 miles an hour and a service ceiling of 38,000 feet. The aircraft was difficult to control, and it was underperforming in almost every aspect. More seriously, the X-3 did not approach its planned top speed. Its first supersonic flight required that the airplane make a 15-degree dive to Mach 1.1. On July 28, 1953, Bridgman pushed the aircraft to its limit and reached Mach 1.2 in a dive of 30 degrees from 36,000 feet. On October 21, 1953, one of the engines lost portions of the turbine blades during a flight test, forcing Bridgman to make a single-engine landing on the afterburner. When the contractor test program ended in 1953, the X-3 was finally delivered to the USAF. The X-3 Stiletto flew 20 times under the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics and the U.S. Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel Frank K. Everest, a veteran USAF pilot, experienced firsthand the sluggish controls at low speeds of the X-3. He called the aircraft one of the most difficult airplanes I have ever flown. NACA pilot Joseph A. Walker made his pilot checkout flight in the X-3 Stiletto on the 23rd of August 1954, then conducted 8 research flights in September and October. According to NACA spreadsheets, during these tests, the X-3 was abruptly rolled at transonic and supersonic speeds, with the rudder kept centered. These tests would lead to the X-3's most significant flight and the near loss of the aircraft. On the 27th of October, 1954, Walker made an abrupt left roll at Mach 0.92 and an altitude of 30,000 feet. The X-3 rolled as expected, but also pitched up 20 degrees and yawed 16 degrees. The aircraft gyrated for 5 seconds before Walker was able to get it back under control. He then set up for the next test point. Walker put the X-3 into a dive, accelerating to Mach 1.154 at 32,000 feet, where he made an abrupt left roll. The aircraft pitched down and recorded an acceleration of negative 6.7 Gs, then pitched upwards to 7 Gs. At the same time, the X-3 side-slipped, resulting in a loading of 2 Gs. Walker managed to bring the X-3 under control and successfully landed. After that, the X-3 was grounded for months. The post-flight examination showed that the fuselage had been subjected to its maximum load limit. Had the acceleration been higher, the aircraft could have broken up. Walker and the X-3 had experienced roll inertia coupling, in which a maneuver in one axis will cause an uncommanded maneuver in other two. At the same time, several North American F-100 Super Sabres were involved in similar incidents. A research program was started by NACA to understand the problem and find solutions. Walker made another 10 flights between the 20th of September 1955 and the last on the 23rd of May 1956. The aircraft was subsequently retired to the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Although the X-3 never met its intention of providing aerodynamic data in Mach 2 cruise, its short service was of value. It showed the dangers of roll inertia coupling and proved early flight test data on the phenomenon. Its small, highly loaded unswept wing was used in Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, and it was one of the first aircraft to use titanium. Finally, the X-3's very high takeoff and landing speeds required improvements in tire technology. Today, it can be appreciated on the museum's 4th floor as one of the first prototypes created to achieve Mach 1 and 2 speeds in the age of supersonic fighters.
Wings. They can mean freedom, or they can mean conquest. There was Napoleon's eagle. There was the Romanovs, the Habsburgs, and Bismarck's iron bird. Europe writhed under their assaults. Entire nations appeared and disappeared, swallowed up or packed together from the debris of war, the vengeance of peace treaties. A child born under one flag might be christened under another. World peace is still a dream. But war has revealed one great truth. Right or wrong, strong nations survive and increase. Defense used to be a simple thing. A shield against a sword. A castle wall. A moat. But today the highest mountain is too low to serve as a wall, and the widest sea too narrow for a moat. And there is no place to hide. Defense today means that a nation must be able to see far beyond its own borders, to keep watch over the topless corridors of air, the open road to conquest, to look deep into countries beyond, alert for movement, concentration, the massing of men and arms, to challenge all approaches to one's borders in the ancient ritual of sign and countersign. Defense today means to take action rather than avoid it, to escape the large war by facing the small one. And finally, the glossary of defense today must include the word nuclear. This is the ideal case, a special weapon for each need, but few nations can afford it. What can smaller nations do then? How can they keep their freedom? For they know better than large nations that weakness invites aggression. One thing they can do is stand together, courage added to courage, strength added to strength. Another thing they can do is to buy wisely, for smallness has its advantages: less territory to protect, shorter ranges. The wisest buy would be a weapon, a single weapon, which can play all the roles in modern defense. Such a weapon is the F-104. It can easily cover the territory of any one nation and can be equipped to range far beyond. Nothing can fly higher. Nothing can fly faster. Nothing can elude it by hugging the ground. The F-104 is a tower in the sky from which men can keep vigil over their homeland. Bad weather will not hamper the vigil, nor will darkness end. There is always someone on watch, ready to change from guardian angel to angel of destruction. Nothing can outfly the 104. It established many of the world's speed and altitude records. Even standing on its tail, it can fly faster than sound. It can carry firepower sufficient to knock down a flight of enemy bombers with one punch. And it is equally adept in the many precise roles of close support. Even though we have entered the nuclear age, conventional techniques remain highly important. Strafing is far from outmoded. Skip bombing over flat terrain has devastating effects. Firebombing is a good way to flush out an entrenched opponent without sacrificing ground forces. Dive bombing gives pinpoint accuracy. And there may be occasion for high-altitude precision bombing. The 104 is also a nuclear bomber. It streaks in low under radar's horizon. It zooms up to lock its load. It escapes during the bomb's long trajectory. In short, whatever the defense need: surveillance, interception, air superiority, or nuclear deterrence, the F-104 fills that need. get for all its dash and power, the 104 is easy on pilots. It takes off and lands slower than most other supersonic aircraft, and it uses less runway. It's steady enough to thread a needle. It's gentle enough for the delicate measures of close formation. The Air Training Command of the United States Air Force said of the 104 in its evaluation, "It is agreed by all pilots that the F-104 is as easy, if not easier in all cases, to fly and land than other supersonic or subsonic fighter aircraft." And down on the ground, the men who stand behind the pilot, who change the tires and the engines and hang the weapons, these men have found the 104 very easy to get along with. United States Air Force figures show that the maintenance record of the 104 matches that of simple trainers and obsolete fighters, and falls far below that of other supersonics. A few aircraft cost less than the 104, and there are several much more expensive. But nothing cheaper can begin to match it, and nothing more expensive can overmatch it. Several of the world's free nations have already armed themselves with this potent weapon, forgetting national differences in the larger cause of freedom. The prime advantage lies in the 104's versatility, the purchase of one aircraft rather than several. But there are other advantages. Manufacture of these aircraft can take place in the home nation, allowing practical adjustments in fiscal policy, increasing employment opportunities, keeping alive important crafts and professional skills. Many lands will soon see and hear the F-104 and call it their own. For it is not primarily an American airplane. It was shaped on the anvil of the Korean War, a conflict borne by all free nations. Any nation that calls itself free and intends to remain free has a right to the F-104, a right to build it for themselves, and a right to fly it in defense of freedom. For, as has been learned most bitterly, the strength of one free nation is the strength of all. The weakness of one, the weakness of all. Freedom as a word may grow tired, but freedom as a way of life will not. For freedom is what a man calls home, city, town, or village. He may have been born there and chosen to stay, or he may have moved on, but he chose. Freedom is a man's work, new or centuries old. And while work may be a burden, it is also a pride when a man is free. Freedom is a man's children, green growth on an old branch, remembrance of what was good and hope for better. Freedom is a man's leisure, his time in the sun, his slow walk through beauty, his holidays, his festivals. Freedom is a man's institutions, his commerce, his laws, his parliaments, his endless struggle to substitute the vote for the fist. And freedom is a man's reach for heaven, his need of a God to lift him high. Freedom is a man's vision of beauty, language of heart, spoken by word by song, by eloquent hand. Freedom at best is man's kindest picture of himself.